thank you all for very interesting thoughts and sharing your insights. We very soon is going to open up for questions and comments for the audience. Just give me a sign and I'll notice you on the speakers list. But while you do, I'll have just a follow-up to your introductions. And I can start with you, Peder Egenæs, and actually that is a question to all of you. Companies, the business community, what would be your advice for those business leaders who want to invest in China? Do you discourage it? Do you promote it? What are your thoughts on this, Peder?
We certainly don't discourage it in the sense that we don't say one should not invest in China. But I think there are several things one should be wary of, and that is how you yourself, within your business, how you are allowed to operate, how those who deliver stuff, underleverandører, how they operate, and that you constantly have to beware that there might be serious human rights violations connected to your business, and that you should do whatever you can in that specific sense, but also in the wider sense. And it's interesting to see Amnesty International released a report on child labor in the cobalt mining in DRC. And a lot of the cobalt goes through Chinese companies before it goes to Apple, etc., etc. And we have noticed an interest from Chinese companies in trying to improve their, let's say, human rights related ways of working. Probably because they see that that could create a problem for them in the West if they don't do it. So working through the companies, the Chinese companies, seems actually to be a way to try to just inject human rights thinking into Chinese society. So certainly we do not say boycott China. I think that would be a silly thing. But one has to be aware and one has to speak up. Of course, there won't be any freedom of organization. So how do you work around that? Do you try to, at least within your own company, have some sort of negotiations with your workers so that you can, try to make small inroads? So it's a difficult game, but what you shouldn't do is just accept everything because you make money, as has been said here several times.
Stein, Ringen, your thoughts or advice to the business community?
Well, they don't ask me for my advice very often. But I would say two things. One is that it is very difficult to do business in China. Foreign companies find it it's a very, very difficult area to do business. And I think that businesses are sometimes naive and blue-eyed about the big Chinese market and the big opportunities, but it is a business environment which is very, very difficult to manage. It's also a business environment where it is very difficult to be honest, to do honest business. In spite of all we are hearing about anti-corruption, the Chinese economic system is struck through by corruption and organized crime. And it is a very hard area in which to do honest business. I think there are more challenges for businesses that want to get involved in China than they themselves often are aware of. And my advice to businesses that want to engage in China is that they should be aware of these difficulties, business difficulties, and the difficulties of being honest.
Lobsang, Sangay.
You said the business leaders don't ask you, but I would say they don't listen to me. But I'll still try to make the case that, we should look at the bigger picture. All the major companies in America, so many countries in Europe now, lately Norway, are saying we have to enter the Chinese market because there are 1.3 billion people. If you sell one salmon to one Chinese, that's 1.3 billion people eating 1.3 billion salmon, and we make so much money. All the business people, all the countries went with that idea, with that utopia. Now what has happened? All the countries have trade deficit other way around. Chinese are selling more to you and you have trade deficit. America, the country of entrepreneurship, went to China. Now there's trade deficit because China is selling more to America than other way around. So hence, Norway is saying we have to enter. I remember talking to this people. Why you're so obsessed with going to China? They said, no, that's the in thing in the world. That's what it is, in thing in the world. We must have office there, a swanky office of Norway or Norwegian company. I mean, for a swanky office and to have a status that you have entered China because China is the in thing, you want to compromise your values, your principle, and your human rights. I mean, then, in your own country, in your own community, businessmen, with your own family, you talk of moral and ethics. And when you go to China, you sell it or you leave it there. So of course one should enter into China and make business. But who profits and what's the cost? A Norwegian company goes there and you have certain business ethics here, certain rules and regulations, certain interests of local people are taken care of. And then once you're in China, you overlook or you violate those things. Then you're not benefiting or helping Tibetan people or Chinese people, and you're not helping your country as well. And then again, it's the mystery of the whole world. I don't know who can solve this. Norway, with a surplus budget every year, with the largest sovereign fund, wants to enter into China, make money, and compromise morals. I simply really don't understand it. If Norway cannot talk about human rights of Tibet and Liu Xiaobao, I don't know which country can.
I have registered 3 people on the speakers list, but before I move on, I just want to ask an equally important question, is that it's not only Western businesses want to go to China. China is very active around the world. Should we be aware in Norway or Europe to allow Chinese enterprise to come into Europe? What are your thoughts, Lobsang, Sangay? Should we be aware? Should we refuse them?
Yeah, market economy is market economy. You should open up. But you should look at where they're going and what they're doing. And there's a big debate in Australia. The Chinese business have come in Australia. They're invested. They're buying farms. They're buying water. They're buying real estate. And a lot of Chinese students are also coming and studying in China. It's good for Australia. So this is the 3rd largest income of Australia is education, and the largest number of students are Chinese. Now, what's happening? If a professor teaches and mentions Tibet, Chinese student will object, and the professor is fired. Yes? You just Google Australian professors fired for human rights in China, you'll find examples. A politician speaks for human rights. Chinese businessmen will withdraw their funding, their contribution. They support the other candidate wins. This is happening in Australia. And this is, in fact, a documentary called Four Corner, which became so popular, so widely watched. You just see. And when they come, we must welcome them. But at what cost and what price? Are they, again, as I said, are we going to transform China or China is going to transform you? And at the moment, China is transforming all of you, not us. We're still fighting Tibetans. We are the good guys. We are non-violent. We are peaceful. We are Dalai Lama. We are human rights. Where we have an impeccable reputation as far as being the good guys. We are still standing. We are still fighting a good cause, a good fight. Non-violent one. And I know we will prevail because Mr. Buddha has already prevailed in China. And Mr. Buddha likes Dalai Lama more than anyone else. So we have insight into China. Right? Whether you're with me or not, we have Buddha inside China. We will get there. Hence, choice is yours. So how you transform? As far as Tibetan is concerned, we are transforming China with Buddhism. And are you with us on human rights or not? That's the question you have to ask the Chinese businessmen as well.
Stein, Ringen, your thoughts?
Following up on Australia, only, I think yesterday, a story broke about an Australian publishing house which has decided not to publish a book which was in print, about to be published, about the Chinese influence in Australian universities. Okay? So the Chinese influence in Australian universities is large. Now an Australian academic has written a book about it, has a contract with the publishing house, but the publishing house in the last moment decides not to publish it as a result of threats from China. So China is very active in China, the People's Republic, is very active in influence abroad, as we know very well in Norway. In the academic field, which is mine, this takes place to some degree through what is known as Confucius Institutes, which are Chinese institutions that are established within Western universities under semi-management from China, not outside of the universities, not as the British Council or the German Goethe Institutes, but inside our universities are established institutes which are under the management of China. This should not happen. This should not be allowed. It should be obvious to us, with our principles of academic freedom, that we do not accept institutions within our universities which are under the management of a state which is not protective of academic freedom. So yes, we should be very, very concerned and very wary of Chinese influence engagement. Oh, China, for example, forbids Facebook in China, but outside of China, the People's Republic now is using Facebook very actively for propaganda. I'm on Facebook and I see it almost every day. Sponsored messages on Facebook from the People's Republic, on Facebook, the same Facebook that the People's Republic forbids inside China.
Right. Jon Peder, 1 minute before we move to the first question, what are your thoughts about Chinese business in Norway, for example?
Well, I'm not very knowledgeable about how this business community is working, but I just think we need to be very wary of illiberal states that we see promoting their own ways of thought within our liberal societies, whether it is Saudi Arabia or China. And I think China is rising in that area, and maybe we should be more wary of the academic and cultural influences than business itself. If it comes to the point that it has in Australia, where I didn't know that, but where Chinese business people are sponsoring or withdrawing sponsorships of politicians, then of course you really need to be looking out for what is going on. So it is a very, very, what should I say? It's a world in change in this sense. China is very consistently trying to change the ways of, should we call it, sort of international diplomacy in a very broad sense. And we should be aware of that and very critical.
Yes.
Let me
30 seconds before we move on to the first gentleman sitting on the first rank behind there.
Yeah. Sure. 4 years ago, when I went to Australia, the question was, then Australian foreign minister will meet me or not? There was a big debate. Obviously, he was not meeting me. This time I went, he has become the highest paid consultant for the Chinese government. So when I came to Norway this time, again, this issue of Norwegian foreign minister, all that. And I said, what happened to him? And he has become the chairman of World Economic Forum, something like that. I was glad he was not a paid consultant from China, you know. So,
maybe it is.
So, I mean, this is how it works, you see. So as I said, they are transforming us or you, not other way around.
Right. I have noticed 6 people wanting to come on the speakers list, and I'll try to make sure that everybody gets a chance to ask their questions or comments. So please be brief. First,
okay.
the gentleman.
The Stein Jon Kvale, my name. The leader was taking the principal question out of my mouth. Really, it's a question of not how to invest in China, but the Chinese are investing in Norway. Concretely, they are building bridges in northern Norway far cheaper than any of the competitors. In extreme northeast, Egenæs, the politicians and the press are just cheering up because the Chinese have some interests to invest in the Barents Sea. Now it's not that we are both actually. We cannot, now I speak for the little people, not the big rich people in Oslo. Thank you.
Just deliver to by. Yeah, I take that as a comment. I haven't seen if anybody wants to follow up. I think you shared your thoughts on it. So I think we'll move on to the gentleman sitting over there. You'll get your microphone very soon. Just let me also repeat the speakers list, so I'll make sure that I don't ignore anybody. I also noticed the woman sitting over there, the gentleman sitting here, the woman sitting there, and the gentleman sitting there. I think that's what we'll make time for. Go ahead.
Most of us are willing to listen to frank and friendly advice if it's offered tactfully and our own terms. And we hate to be the subject of declarations of disgust and loud criticism. I think states are no different than people, and in China in particular is not very different in this regard. So my heretical question is this: has the Nobel Prize to Liu Xiaobo contributed to promote or deteriorate the situation for human rights in China? And the second question is, the question today is, how should we deal with China? The answer is of the panel, if I understood correctly, is that we should remain in the freezer and continue to shout declarations of disgust from the freezer.
Well, that's an interesting and provocative question. If I start with you, Stein, one thing is that it makes us feel good if we speak out. But what are the consequences in China? Does it actually work?
Yes, it works. In two ways. First, the Chinese leaders are very, very sensitive to how they are seen in the rest of the world. It works a little bit if Norway speaks. It works more, obviously, if we speak collectively. But it works. The other reason it works, and this is very important in my view, is that the Chinese prisons are full of political prisoners. And those, ladies and gentlemen, need to hear that someone out there in the world remembers them and cares about them. It is very important for those individuals who are imprisoned for their elementary right to speak, that they can sometimes feel that someone out there in the world remembers them and is concerned for them and for their families. So it matters.
Peder?
Yes. I totally agree with Stein and Ringen, which isn't surprising. But I'd also just sort of comment on the particular question of Liu Xiaobo. No, I don't think the Nobel Peace Prize to Liu Xiaobo has made the human rights situation in China better. In fact, I just said that it has become worse since 2010. But what it has done is that it has inspired the few and very courageous people within the civil society who knew of him and who agreed with him. And they keep saying this. I very humbly call them my colleagues. I don't reach their ankles, but you know, they and to them it was incredibly important, both those who now are in prison, but certainly those who are outside of prison, that one of them was acknowledged with the Nobel Peace Prize. And in the long term, I think that can be very, very important.
Just to follow up, Peder, before I leave, just to take the Norwegian government's argument, and it has some merit. You can say that now we have a relationship to China. Now we can engage as long as we don't do it publicly, or how we want to put it. What do you think about that argument?
I certainly wouldn't say that we should be in the freezer in the sense that we should try to not have any contact with China. But if that contact comes with a very, very high price of, for instance, not even, this is a cheap point, but still, the Prime Minister has a press conference when Prince dies, and she does not comment. She says everybody has the right to a vacation when Liu Xiaobo dies. I mean, it just shows that this relationship now comes with a very, very high price, and it comes with a high price for us, but it's also a very clear signal to everybody else, certainly small nations like Norway, that, do not criticize China. And criticism doesn't have to come in the way of shouting abuse at each other, but certainly, I mean, if you imprison people who think differently, if you abduct publishers because in a outside of your main influence area, somebody has to speak up. We can't just say, let's forget about it. In 2,000 years, maybe China will have changed because we have sort of chipped away by just having contact with them. You have to speak up because these are real people. They are not, I mean, we always say, well, there are so few compared to the 1.3 billion. But if you were one of them, wouldn't you want somebody to speak up on your behalf?
You know, now Norway wants to engage in bilateral dialogue and behind closed door on human rights issues with China. I mean, I can tell you, in the last 10 years, all the countries have done it. It doesn't work. Now, I have met with diplomats who engages in bilateral dialogue on human rights with Chinese counterparts. They say every year we go, we recycle the same thing, and they send us low-ranking bureaucrats who have studied in Norway to a Norwegian counterpart and talk about tundra and, you know, really, and salmon. It doesn't work. Why you want to go to a futile exercise? You know, the definition of stupidity is if you keep doing the same thing over and over again, you're called stupid, right? So why you want to go there? Now, second point one gentleman made was, should we freeze ourselves and keep making noise? Yes, sometimes freezing is good. Nelson Mandela spent 28 years in prison and 8 years in solitary confinement. That freezing helped transform South Africa. Martin Luther King went to prison. He froze himself. Gandhiji went to prison. He froze himself. You might say, he's in prison. He's not doing anything, but the symbolism matters. By Norway not speaking on or standing up for Liu Xiaobo, what happened was you have given a license to Chinese government and say, I can deal with Norway like this, now I can deal with Denmark and Finland and Sweden, all the European countries, because now I have a license. Because why? Norway didn't need our money. You have surplus money. But you submitted, you succumbed to us. Now kowtow to us, to the rest of the world. So freezing is not bad. But at the same time, Chinese leaders care. Why? Every morning when they get up, they don't read, they don't watch CCTV or they don't read Xinhua News Agency because they know it's propaganda, it's nonsense. They read New York Times. They read Washington Post. They care. They want to know, the whole world wants them to say it's good. And even if there is a Norway on the northern part of the globe, raising his flag and saying, hey, we are in freeze, but we are making it very clear. It matters. That's why they came to Norway. That's why they say, hey, let's have a deal, but in our favor. So hence, you know, it's not a bad thing if you're frozen, but provided you're losing a lot, then it's a bad thing. But Norway is not losing anything. You don't need Chinese money. I mean, as a national GDP, as far as GDP is concerned, right? So, you know, we should. Now, what has happened is that now, even the Nobel Peace Prize, who will be awarded this year, will hesitate a bit. They will come to get the award, get the money, but when push comes to shove, they pretty much know Norway might abandon them also.
We go to the woman sitting in the end. Please introduce yourself and speak up.
My name is Maria Lundberg. I work at the University of Oslo in the law faculty, and that will reflect on my question. Thank you very much for your very good presentations and points of view. I would like to know a little bit about your understanding of the concept of the socialist rule of law with Chinese characteristics. Because it's obvious from your speeches that we need to interact. The business community will interact with China, and China will have an influence on us, according to me at least. So how do we understand the socialist rule of law with Chinese characteristics? Because will go when we go into details and not big speeches about Chinese ways or Chinese being here and there. I would like to know a little bit more. Thank you.
Start with Stein Ringen. Touched upon it.
Well, the development, on the one side, there's been a positive development in law in China. Now, Chinese life is now better regulated by law than it has been previously. I mean, go back to the Maoist era, there was hardly law at all. Now there is a growing body of law that regulates various forms of economic and social activity. So China is no longer a country that is ruled without law. It is now ruled with law. But there isn't a rule of law system, because there is something that stands above the law when necessary, and that is the party. Now, I mentioned previously the Chinese state constitution, which in many ways is sound from the point of view we are discussing today. But China, that has many things, also has two constitutions. So it has the state constitution and it has a party constitution. And the party constitution stands above the state constitution. And then above the party constitution, as written also, stands the party practice. So that the party itself stands above the law and can, in essential issues, do as it likes. And what matters then is that the party is present everywhere. In all private businesses, there are party representatives. And obviously in all public agencies and all organizations. So the party is present everywhere, and the party controls and in the final say decides what is done. So there is a better system of law than there has been, but it is still a system in which the law is not supreme and is not more authoritative than the party wishes it to be. So that, I think, is at least some of the aspects of law with Chinese characteristics. There is better law, but that law is still under party control.
Lobsang, Sangay, anything to elaborate
I
on?
think it's made very clear. The socialism is Chinese characteristic in New Era, when Xi Jinping gave 3 hours and 25 minutes speech in the 19th Party Congress, we said it very clear. No liberal democracy, no freedom of speech, no human rights. It's simply socialism, one party rule. And that's the new era. A new era is the international frontier. That's the package we all will get. And whether you buy it or not, it's up to us. So this is made very, very clear by the Chinese government. So there'll be no space. So even the Norwegian business people, they have to subscribe to that. Because as the professor said, socialism with Chinese characteristic is Xi Jinping's thought, meaning it's equivalent to Mao Zedong's thought. It's enshrined in Chinese Communist Party's constitution, which is above national constitution, which is above all the laws that's there. So only Mao Zedong thought and Xi Jinping's thought prevail. Even Deng Xiaoping is less. Deng Xiaoping at least say in 50 years there will be democracy in China. Now Xi Jinping said no. Socialism with Chinese characteristic.
Right. I have noticed 3 more speakers I think we have time for. First, the gentleman sitting there, and I also noticed the woman and the gentleman. I'll try to notice you as well, but first, this gentleman.
Thank you very much. My name is Magnus Bjerke. I study Chinese studies at the University of Oslo. I'd just like to stray slightly from the subject of business today, but I'd like to use this opportunity to learn more about Tibet. So I was wondering if you could tell us some more specifics about what the Chinese government is doing in Tibet to exacerbate the environmental issues, etc., and how you think a free Tibet will be able to solve these issues specifically. As you say, it seems like you paint this as a sort of a fix-all with democracy and stuff, but as we sometimes see, democracies aren't the best at solving pressing issues. And at least one thing that can be said for the Chinese government is that the authoritarian style might be able to get things done. And also the issue with the Dalai Lama, who is an albeit very healthy but old man, and who would be his successor in such a case. And also, seeing as Tibet is the water tower of the world, wouldn't it be sort of a kind of madness for China to give this up? And in the case where Tibet was to be free, wouldn't it be madness for, say, India to not want to increase their influence in the region? Thank you.
Yeah, a very big question. I'm afraid you only have 90 to 120 seconds to answer it.
So Tibetans are not saying Chinese should give up the water tower of Asia. What we are saying is we belong there for hundreds and hundreds of centuries, so we should share it we must have a say on the water tower of Asia. That's it. And then our proposal is middle way approach, which is to seek genuine autonomy for the Tibetan people within China, within the Chinese constitution. So what we are saying is if Chinese government implement their own laws, we will take that as genuine autonomy. So it's a win-win proposition for Chinese government and us. Now instead, what's happening is that the party secretary of Tibet Autonomous Region has always been Chinese, the most powerful girl, never a Tibetan, right? Now, similarly, on the environmental issue, minerals are extracted, right? And that creates pollution. You know why Chinese cell phone is cheap? Do you know? Because they use lithium battery. And 90% of lithium comes from Tibetan plateau. When you extract lithium, you have to, in a way, boil, heat the rock, and you have to use so much chemical, it poisons the river, it poisons the soil, it poisons the air. And Tibetans are living or suffering the pollution of the lithium, and the lithium is cheap because they don't pay us. And they use it in cell phone, and we all buy it. And it's a Chinese product, is so good. Similarly, rare earth, 90% of the whole world of rare earth is in Inner Mongolia. And if Norwegian company wants to buy, you have to pay 4 or 5, sometimes 10 times more for rare earth. But Chinese company, dirt poor. They just pick it. They don't pay anything to Mongolian, and then they just put it in cell phone. And Chinese products so cheap. Each time you use Chinese product, it's at the cost of the suffering of the Tibetan people and the environmental destruction of the Tibetan people, right? So, Larungar Monastery has 12,000 monks and nuns. It was 12 months project. It was destroyed, and just this August reduced to 5,000 monks and nuns. 7,000 monks and nuns were expelled, never to come back. And as we speak, Yashingar with 6,000 nuns are demolished, and they're not allowed to practice. In Larungar, 3 nuns committed suicide. This is our home. This is all we have. You're destroying it. They committed suicide. So this is the reality of sufferings of the Tibetan people. And we are being very reasonable. We are not saying shout for the sake of shouting. We are not saying make noise. I say make reasonable noise. That is genuine autonomy as per Chinese laws for the Tibetan people.
Before we move on to the next speaker, I just want to ask you, Stein, there was a common argument here that authoritarian-style leadership gets things done. It's better than democracy. You've written extensively about democracy. How would you answer that question in 1 minute or comment?
We overestimate the Chinese achievements. And let me just put it in statistical terms. If you look in pure economic growth, if you look at economic growth in Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and China, and you take the periods of the best economic growth in those 4 countries and compare them, they're about the same. So the Chinese economic growth story is a typical East Asian growth story. It's not exceptional. It just looms large because of the size of the country. In fact, in this comparison between the best growth trajectories in these 4 countries, China is number 4. Not much, but the others are ahead of China in the best growth periods. So we overestimate the economic achievements under the People's Republic in the last decades because it looms so large because of the size of the country. Of course, there's been massive economic growth, but it's been a pretty typical East Asian story.
Madame, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for very interesting sharing. My name is Irene Chang, and I was a career diplomat from Taiwan. I have a quick comment and 1 question. Thank you very much, Professor. I really like your comment on China. And I think it's important when the world is focusing so much on China and dealing with it, we really need to have the people who has the right way of thinking and to deal in a smart way, because I think zero-sum game really does not work out well with China. It doesn't always lead into a preferable result. But if we talk with them in a right way, it might result in a much better profitable way, as I do see My question also is that I think when we talk about China, there's this elite, small elite, princeling, the ruling class. There's also massive public. When we talk about China, there are two different parts. Yes, the Chinese leader, they are tightened, their control on public opinion whatsoever. But I think the mass public, they're very frustrated as now the globalization and modernization has enhanced their knowledge about the world, about democracy, how other people live. And they travel so extensively all over the world. They see the lifestyle in the West world, they envy that, they want that. I want to know how realistic do you estimate that if there could be any transformation within the Chinese society which will put pressure upon the princely, upon the ruling class, that the demand from within the society for more openness, which will lead into probably a better improvement on human rights and democracy and whatsoever. Thank you very much. If you can make me sure.
Sure, you can start, Stein. What's the possibility for change within the system?
It's very small possibility. I think the control is now overwhelmingly effective from the regime's side. So I would be very pessimistic about the possibility of change from inside. Now, there's one qualification to that. I don't think it's right to speak of frustration so much in the public, but there is a feeling of moral vacuum. And one result of that feeling is that there is now a religious revival that is sweeping China, in Tibet, but not only, throughout the whole country. There's a huge religious revival. This is in response to the feeling of moral vacuum because of the culture where money has come to be the only value. Now, this is a form of civil society striking back. And that religious revival is a very strong force. So something may come out of that. I would, if there was any place to look for hope for change from the inside, I think it would be from this wave of religious revival, rather than, I'm very sorry to say, because my sympathies are absolutely clear, but I don't think there is much scope for change from the inside, from the human rights movement, or from that side of civil society in China.
Lobsang?
Very pessimistic.
And again, I beg to differ here. We are on the same side of it. And I think Chinese government is using two-pronged strategy. Control self-censorship inside China, control self-censorship in Norway. So hence we have no option but to speak out, from outside. Because there are people inside. The transformation in China is real. The Buddhists, the Christians and all, they all are asserting in their own private space, social space, their freedom. So hence, we have to have dialogue at this level, at people's to people's level. And then if you shut up here, they get discouraged and demoralized. You have to keep speaking for them, and they also keep hearing. So there is control, there is self-censorship, and that's what they're trying. If they succeed, we will be quite outside, and Chinese will be quite inside. So hence this dialogue must go on. That's how you can transform China. Ultimately, again, transformation, I would say, will happen more from inside than outside. And that has always been the case in all the major changes in the whole world. Ultimately, it's the people inside. It's the people in East Germany who led to the fall of Berlin Wall. It's the people in Soviet Union who led to the collapse of Soviet Union. It's the people in East Timor. It's the people in Northern Ireland. It's the people in South Africa. But you need a voice and an echo chamber from outside. So that way, I think that's already happening in China, because we all are social animal, and human rights and freedom, it's innate in us. So we need to express and we need to support.
The two last questions from the audience. First, the gentleman sitting there and the gentleman here. We don't have time for any more, so it's going to be the two last, because we're going to end in 9 minutes, so be brief.
My name is Eivind Hoffman. I'm a semi-retired statistician. My question to the panel is probably related to the last one. What do you see as possible consequences of the dramatic demographic imbalances that China will be experiencing over the next 10, 20, 50 years?
Yeah, it's Stein. Any thoughts about the demographics in China?
Yes, I'm afraid I do, yes. In Shanghai, Beijing, Hong Kong, there are now the lowest birth rates anywhere in the world. The birth rates in the Shanghai population in Shanghai is about 0.7 children per woman. Now this is population decline on a massive scale. Now that is compensated in Shanghai by immigration into Shanghai from other parts of the country, but it is massive. And aging is coming down the track as a train crash towards the Chinese regime. This is something they are doing surprisingly little with. I mean, the power of the authoritarian system to deliver. I mean, for 20 years now, demographers have warned, 25, 30 years, demographers have warned that the demography is undermining the Chinese economy. And there has been very little response from the authorities. Some little twigs, but not very much. So it's a very serious issue about the imbalance between the younger and the elderly population. And then there is the other imbalance between the number of boys and the number of girls that are born. So there are more boys than girls born, about 110 boys for 100 girls, maybe 150 boys for 100 girls. And I keep asking colleagues who know more about this than I, what happens to those 15 boys who can't find wives? What happens to them? Now, I have no idea where they go. There are many young Chinese men who cannot find wives because of the numbers. And this is in a culture where family matters very much. Now, what happens to those 15? I don't know. My fear is that they go into the security services and the army, and that they sit there as a frustrated social element. But I don't know. I don't know what happens. It's to me a mystery. It's to me a mystery.
A short comment, Lobsang, before we have final question.
Demographic shift is one of the several weaknesses as far as China is concerned. It's not a linear trajectory. The Chinese economy is growing, military, political power is growing. Demographic changes will be reality by 2030, I think. Then China will have lower birth rate and more elderly people than the younger people, right? That's one. Environmental destruction and pollution. And then if you look around China, who is their real allies? They have only two friends, Pakistan and North Korea. So China is not, this major power that is made out to be. And then, someone talked about authoritarian get result. It's not true. India, till this year, has higher economic growth than China. The highest economic growth in the whole world, I think, was India till last year, at least compared to China, right? Now it's increasing, and then India also has the largest, youngest population. I think 50% of India's population is less than 35 years old. So demographically, people want to invest more because there are more labors, cheaper labors, right? So you must analyze China from all angles and don't see this as linear trajectory that is going to upswing and rest of the world will be downswing.
Right. Final question from the gentleman sitting there. Be brief because we're running out of time.
Yes, Tor Steinar Grødal from Foss High School in Oslo. I'm here with my history and philosophy class. Where are the front lines through the export of Chinese socialism today through the Silk Road, one way? Where is the new Australias? I never heard about Chinese controlling academics in Australia, etc. Could you give me an overview of where it's burning? Where's the hotspots right now?
Right. I think you'll say what you want, Peder. I'm not sure if this is your main area.
This is not my area of expertise at all.
1 minute final comment.
Yeah, no. I'll leave my minute to the others. Just I think what is important for us as, I guess, most of us voters in Norway is to keep talking to our government so that we sort of try to get out of this situation where we are kowtowing, which I guess might be the right word here now, to the Chinese government. And we have to demand that we stand up for human rights. Because it's not, I mean, it is the Chinese population, it is our population that reflects on us, but it's also ruining a system that it has many imperfections, but it has brought the world step by step improvements. And the Chinese seem to be hell-bent on trying to ruin it to be able to stay or to become the superpower they have ambitions to be. Thank you.
Stein, Ringen, your final comment?
Well, I think on influence, the hotspots are Australia and New Zealand, which are very much in the firing line for Chinese export of influence. So there is a very strong pressure from China into civil society. I should mention Hong Kong, obviously, also, which today has the autonomy that enables it to maintain a rule of law system, but that is also under very strict pressure. Now, the Chinese influence reaches globally, but I think the hotspots are in the near areas, in Australia and New Zealand, where it's very, very tangible, the influence that is coming from China.
I think it's available on YouTube. You should watch the movie TV documentary by Australian Broadcasting Corporation called Four Corners, in which it's clearly documented how Chinese are influencing Australian economy and all that. Now let me come back, to be selfish and come back to Tibet. Because China got away with Tibet in 1950s and 60s. Right? They occupied Tibet. The rest of the world said, it's very sad, it happened to you, it's not going to happen to us. Now Australia is saying it's happened to us. It's New Zealand is saying, Norway is saying, Hong Kong is saying, Macau is saying, all the countries saying, South China, East China, Scarborough Island, even Doklam in India, it's happening to us. So we've been telling for 60 years, it happened to us, to Tibetans, it would happen to you. No one believed. And you gave the license to Chinese government and China. We took over Tibet, larger than whole Western Europe combined. We will take over the rest of the world. Hence, Tibet is the pushback, is the catalyst, is the litmus test. If you do that, had whole pushback in 1960s, they would have hesitated going to South China, East China, Australia, New Zealand. It's the same template that they're using. It's the same blueprint. So hence, Tibet and Taiwan are the litmus tests, really. Liu Xiaobao is the pillar, is the test. And we all know where Norway stands. But I don't want to end on an optimistic note, but I'll pin hope to all the Norwegian friends on another Nobel laureate called His Holiness the Dalai. Thank you very much.
Before we give a warm round of applause, a real warm round of applause, just let me end by saying that I encourage you all to go to civita.no, follow our newsletters. We have many interesting meetings coming up by the end of this year and also next year. And my final comment, thank you for coming, and now a warm round of applause. Thank you all.